Hey, so in this video, I'm going to be setting up a two-step make automation flow. And by make.com, I mean this beautiful software here. And if you haven't already seen it, I already made a video showing you how you can get industry from a website's URL, basically from a lead's email. And you want to go and watch that video first. I'll put a link in the description to that video. Make sure you do watch that video because we're going to use the flow that you set up in Make in this video today as well. So if you have a B2B or service-based agency, you obviously will most likely have a normal lead form on your website. And potentially you also have a sort of second step booking form as well. So the idea is that obviously someone puts in their business email, they can click submit. That stage, you get a bit of information from that lead and your sales team can follow them up. But obviously the ideal is that they really show interest in your service by booking in a time with your sales team directly. And that would be the second stage, scheduling. So what we're actually going to do is set up meta conversions for both of these stages, which is going to provide a bunch of data to Meta's platform. And we're going to also use that industry, like I mentioned earlier, to add another stage of filtering on that to improve the conversions that you are sending through so that if you do get a whole bunch of spam leads that are not appropriate to your business, then those are going to get stuck in the filter and they're not going to send the conversion event, which is actually what we want because we only want to encourage conversion events and push an audience to Meta, which is actually going to be relevant to our target market, obviously. So the first thing you need to do is obviously have a Meta data source set up. And most likely, if you have a running ad account, this is already done. However, if you don't have one set up, then you just need to connect a data source, click web, name it, and create it. And it will ask you to go through adding your website, for example. You probably do want to put that URL in. However, everything after where it tells you to connect the conversions API through a partner integration, etc., don't worry about any of that, okay? You just need to complete the main setup, and once it's connected, once it's created, then that's all you actually need to do at this stage. So once you actually have done that, like I said, we need to test a few conversion events, or we need to create them with absolutely no code, okay? You can see that this test was created just from doing that one step, okay? So make is the one that I'll use today in this example. And you can see, like I said at the start of this video, I've got a page view usual event, I've got a lead event, and I've got a schedule event. And probably what I would be wanting to do in terms of an ad account is would be using the schedule event or perhaps the lead event to actually optimize our ads. The schedule event is obviously going to be the most reliable conversion data. Again, with that filtering enabled as well, it's going to be the best conversion data that you can send to the Facebook account because one, you've provided the most information in actually scheduling that, but two, if they've gone to the step of going through two conversion stages, they're probably qualified and they're probably quite interested in your service. So those customers are obviously going to be your best customers. However, you might find that a lot of people go through that first conversion step and don't do the schedule. Still makes sense to have both conversion events. However, you probably want to play around which one you want to optimize your ads for. So like I said, we were going to do this entire setup with absolutely no code. And when I say no code, I mean not even implementing the Facebook pixel on your website. And why would you want to do that? Well, it actually does make a lot of sense. For example, if you do page speed insights and you actually look at the speed of your website through Google service, you'll notice that one of the main things that they look at is the number of third-party scripts. And if you can avoid any scripts that aren't 100% to do with your website actually enabled on that website, one is going to load faster, but two, obviously, it's going to be a big plus in terms of Google, in terms of SEO, in terms of the traffic that you end up getting by obviously encouraging best practices through Google. So we're going to do exactly that. we're going to implement this page view event specifically first without installing the Facebook pixel code. How can we do that? Well, it depends on how you've set your website up. However, in my case, I'm using Cloudflare. Now, Cloudflare is an amazing service, and if you have your agency website on WordPress, for example, this is an absolutely essential step, I would say. In a few words, Cloudflare is a way to maximize your server in terms of its availability, in terms of its speed, in terms of the ability for people around the world to access it as quickly as possible. So again, if you do run a WordPress website, I highly recommend that you set up Cloudflare. It is quite easy. I won't go through how to set that up today. However, I do recommend you use that. If you use something like Shopify, it does have Cloudflare built in. However, you don't obviously have access to these additional settings. So you still can run through the domain through Cloudflare before you plug it into Shopify. And that's one way to do it. However, in this case, the example that we're going to use today, we're going to use the example of a WordPress website. So you can see once you actually have your Cloudflare enabled and set up, you will see in the left-hand menu here, something called Duraz. And whatever that name is meant to be, this tool is pretty awesome. Okay, so in tools configuration, you can add a new tool. And one of those tools is you guessed it, the Facebook pixel. So all you need to do is go through and continue to add. And the only thing you really need to add is this pixel ID. Really easy to find. It's right here. So you can just copy that out and paste it in. The conversions API token, you can find that under settings. Here, generate access token. So you click that, copy that in, and once you've done that and click continue and enable it, then it will start sending that page view event, which is the most basic event that you can be sending on Facebook's platform. But obviously that's not a conversion event. We also want to be doing these lead events, and this is where make comes in. So like I said, in our past video, we sent the get industry. We made this get industry flow on make. And you can also see here that we have a basic send lead email flow. So the way that I've built my website in terms of how it's integrated with these platforms is that it is entirely no code. The only thing that comes out of these forms is a webhook. And I did speak about webhooks in the last video, but essentially it's just a bit of data that comes out when you hit generate, and it sends it to any URL that you would like it to. And that's where make comes in. We have these webhooks that we can send data to and then perform business actions and automations off the back of this platform without actually having to go in and code all these pieces. So to give you an overview of how this flow is working, what it's doing is it's taking only the email. So you can see in this example, all I have in my lead form is an email, a business email. I don't even have first name, last name because I like to keep it clean. So the first thing we want to do is get industry. And like I showed in the previous video, we are getting that industry through another webhook. So that's what happens here, where this text parser, it takes the URL out of the email and then sends it to this second make scenario where we are getting we're sending the URL and then we're getting the industry back. And then we're passing as JSON. And then, well, originally what we were doing is we were just sending that through an email to receive in our inbox as a new lead. However, we're obviously setting up meta today. And as you can see here, I've added a new module, which is going to trigger the first event, which is the meta lead event. And you can see that this is done with another webhook and another scenario. And what we are sending is the email, the IP, the user agent, and the industry. Now, obviously the email and industry we got as per, obviously their input and that initial flow, but how do we get the IP and the user agent? So this is obviously important because we want to add as much data to the conversion event as possible to assist with Meta's tracking. there is a number of other things that we want to add or we can add as well to improve that matching rate. However, first name, last name, email, phone name, number, IP, and user agent are going to be probably the most vital pieces of information. So in order to get and pass the IP and the user agent, we are going to go back to our example of contact form 7, which we also used in the get industry video. And we are going to use some special mail tags. So contact form luckily supports this pretty much out of the box, which is awesome. So you can see that we have these special tags for IP and user agent. And all we need to do is we need to, in our webhook configuration here, we just need to add them as special mail tags. And now you can see that that data, which is sent to the webhook, includes those items as well, which is awesome. So we just need to add that webhook URL, and this would be the send lead email, would be this URL, and that would trigger this flow, pass all that information, get the industry, and then send this flow with this information. So let's talk about how we're going to set up this meta flow now. So the lead event is obviously starting with that webhook that we just spoke about. Next, what we actually need to do is set up a data store. Now, a data store is essentially a database built into Make, which makes it super easy to store and retrieve data over multiple flows, multiple scenarios. And this is going to be super useful later on. So all we need to do is we need to set up another module, and this is the data store module, and add and replace a record. And what you need to do is you need to add a data store type and essentially add all these fields. And when you actually do a test webhook, again, you can always use Postman to send a test. And if you right click and click run this module only, that's going to give you some initial data, which then you can use in here. Okay, so you want to do that just because it populates the variables, which then you can actually use and set up these modules. But like I said, we just want to set up this data store because we're going to use it later in the video. Next, what we're doing is we are doing the industry checking. So like I said, not only are we doing this with no code, but we're also doing it in a way that we can filter down on the industry of the lead as well, and only send the lead event when it comes under an industry which is relevant to us. So I took this industry list from the exact same list that we used in our previous video, and you can see that here. Okay, so in this list, we have this massive long list of B2B industries, and all I did was copy and paste that into this. And you can see that I just took that first little bit, the markdown, because we don't need that in this call. We can erase that and only keep the industries because we are setting a list variable which has all these industries in it. And if you do paste that in and then right click and then click run this module only, what it will do is it will set that industries array and have all these different industries, which is what we want to do. Next, what we're doing is we're actually checking. So this is obviously going through the flow. If we're imagining this flow going through when someone submits that lead, it's obviously going through these modules, and we've set all the valid industries. And we're going to check from the webhook whether or not the industry that was sent is going to be one of these. Okay. Now, there's a few ways you can do it. There's two ways you can do it, actually. Either you can include all the industries that you want, or you can only include the industries which you want to exclude. Now, that is probably my recommendation, because if you forget one industry or it's miscategorizes an industry, it's obviously the AI categorization is never going to be perfect, then potentially you are going to miss out on some lead events. You're still going to get those leads, but it's not going to send it to Conversions API. So instead, what I'd suggest is whatever industries list that you end up using, you go through and you figure out what leads or what type of industries are the ones that you do not want. Okay. And usually, for something like a B2B industry, the type of industries which you do not want obviously could be anything, but things like HR, for example, organizational development, executive coaching, talent management, consulting, performance management, these are usually one-man shows, you know, and these are the kind of people that, in my experience, absolutely blast agencies with their services and rarely are actually interested in undertaking a service of the agency. Instead, they're looking to sell their own service. So that's a great way to go about it, is instead of providing this in massive list, what you could do is you could just only include, for example, these elements of the list. And then when you set up this filter, what you would do is you set up the industry's list, and then array operator contains is currently what it is, which means that this industry has to be within this list. Instead, what you do is you scroll down and do does not contain. Array operator, make sure it's this one, not string. It needs to be array and does not contain. And that means that the industry is not within the list that you've decided to exclude. Now, the next thing that we're looking to do is get first name and last name. Now, like I said at the start, we are only getting email, and Meta actually requires that you send, there's a couple of different combinations that you can send as a minimum requirement. However, if you've just only got email, then the absolute minimum of what you need is a first name and last name. And in this case, I don't have that. Okay, so I'm actually going to use another service to enrich this based on a LinkedIn profile. And this is really awesome. You can actually use that LinkedIn information in a few different ways. You could actually pull their bio, for example. You could pull their current job title and set up another list and set up another exclusion parameter to potentially only filter out certain job titles. You could even use OpenAI to categorize these job titles based on industry. And that might be better, more effective for your given industry, your given business, versus the Get Industry system that we are using, which is based on their company website. If we wanted to use LinkedIn instead, this might be more accurate in your case. However, in this example, we're only using it to get the first name and last name. Now, API enrich.so is a good API which I found, which you can just plug in their email, and it's going to return essentially a big long string of their LinkedIn information. And I can show you exactly what that looks like. So if I send an example here and run once only, it's going to hit that API and it's going to return data based on a bunch of information about me, essentially. You can see I've got location here. I've got, my first name, last name, like I said. I've got my follow account. I've got organizational ID. So again, there's lots of ways you can actually use this information to create more filters, which would indicate when to send this conversions API. But that's ultimately up to you and your business. So all we're doing now is we're taking that data that was returned from the API and we're passing it to be used by Make. Keep in mind this API is paid. It provided me with a couple of API credits to test, and I recommend that you give that a go. And if it works for you, then it's not very expensive. I'd probably just pay the money. Like I said, you can always give a test run first without paying anything. Last, you can see here that now we are sending that actual conversions API event. And what we need to do is just set up a connection. This is super easy to do. Just put in your business name, put in this information, put in any string here. It actually doesn't matter. And then click save. And what it'll actually do is open up a window and ask you to sign in with your Facebook account and select the correct pixel and everything else. So you don't actually need to put in any further information in regards to that, into actually setting up the connection. Next, what we need to do is we need to select the lead event name in terms of the type of event that it is. And in our example, it's obviously a lead event. So we're going to select that. We want now is event time. The event ID can really be anything. I've just put in the execution ID. It needs to be unique each time though. So you want to use something which is unique. Even email isn't necessarily going to be unique because you can obviously send a lead with the same email multiple times. So you want to use event ID. You want to use current time, for example, would be another opportunity. Timestamp you could use, or now. That would also work as an event ID. Ideally, what this is actually used for is matching with your pixel. And because we are not using a pixel for these events, it actually doesn't really matter. And we're not actually doing any deduplication with that, so it doesn't actually matter. This should be website. Next, we're putting in all the information. So this is pretty much everything that we got from the LinkedIn call, that enrichment process that we did. So the email just comes directly from the webhook, but everything else comes from my LinkedIn. So you can see I've got phone numbers here. I don't believe it picked up a phone number for me, but if you do have one plugged into LinkedIn, then you can send that through. We've also got last name, we've got first name. And then this is where the client IP address and the user agent from that initial webhook comes in also. So you want to put that in. Also, it does improve the matching rate a lot. And if you are going to send these events, you obviously want to ensure that they're being matched to actual individuals so that they can be used correctly. And that's all you need to do. Once you've done that, you will see that if you run a test, and again, you can use Postman to do that, you can send something like this, and it will actually go through and send that conversions API. You can also do a test event. This overview doesn't update straight away, so you can always take the website events or server events for that matter, take this code and copy that, and you can actually copy that into this field here, and which is right here. And if you do that, it will come up straight away right here. So in this, basically on this page, it will show you those events while you're testing. Otherwise, you're gonna have to wait a few hours for it actually to come into this overview screen, which is pretty annoying. Great, now we're gonna set up the Calendly side of things, which is the calendar booking event, second lead event. Now, you might have noticed in my make flows that I didn't have another module or another webhook to this. And there is an important reason for that. And that's simply because Calendly is obviously an external service. So when you can see this Calendly calendar here, we're not actually using the website for this. We're obviously embedding Calendly into our website, which means that we don't have direct control over things like webhooks, for example, from the basis of the website. We can't use, these WordPress forms. We can't use these WordPress plugins to implement this. Instead, we are reliant on Calendly, or if you are using another piece of software, something like Chili Piper, then you obviously need to do the equivalent on that piece of software. But today we're going to use Calendly. So if you have this set up already, you probably already have a booking page set up, and there is a number of things you need to do for this to work with Make. Firstly, you absolutely have to be on a standard plan, on the first paid plan. Fortunately, for this to work, you need to do that. So that would be the first thing to do. The next thing you need to do is you want to ensure that you're collecting phone number. So that would be, obviously first name, last name, phone number. We want to ensure that we're collecting all those things as well. Okay. And to do that, this was a very important mistake that I initially made, and it took me a long time to figure out. I initially had a question for phone number. Okay. It was asking for the phone number, and I just had a name instead of first name, last name. Okay. Needs to be first name, last name, email, and you don't have a phone number question. To get that phone number, what you actually need to do is set up a text reminder. So you can go into communications here, click edit and turn on the text reminder. As soon as you turn that on, then it will actually automatically come up with this text message phone number. Now, for whatever reason, that's just the way it is. For it to come through the webhook the way that we're about to set it up, the only way that I could get the phone number to work is by this method. So I suggest you do the same. And again, I just had name, it needs to be first name, last name, so we can send this individually to Facebook's platform. And you'll notice a distinction here that I'm using first name, last name from the entered user versus the first name, last name from the LinkedIn account, like I was doing on the lead event. Perhaps you want to do the same. Perhaps instead, you want to put this data store later and include the first name and last name and not rely on the user to correctly put their first and last name in the scheduling event, because potentially they type it in wrong or they just don't care and put in the correct information. versus LinkedIn, which is probably going to be more in line with their actual name, essentially. Cool. So how do we set up this book event, lead event? So what I did was I added a Calendly module, and you can see that there is watch events available for Calendly. So instead of a webhook, it's just a Calendly connection directly. And this is very easy to do. I just needed to add a new connection and just needed to do invitee created. And I needed to select my event. Essentially, this is just the string that comes through, but this is the booking event which I was created. So once I do that and add the connection and sign in, it's very easy to set up this kind of webhook-esque module. Once you've done that, we're actually taking the data store information. And it makes sense now why we needed this, okay? Because we had, if you recall, we had in the data store, we had email, IP, username, and industry. And in the Calendly information, in terms of the inputs that you're providing to schedule an event, we have first name, last name, phone number, and email. So again, because Calendly is an external service, we don't actually have the IP and the user agent. And this is going to be quite valuable to Facebook's conversions API. We want to be sending that. And because we are in a different scenario, we don't have access to that IP because it's a completely different execution. So that's where the data store comes in, and that's why it's important. So you can see that I had that set up and I used email as the key, which means that now we have that same email. So assuming that they put in the same email that they put in to book the meeting as they did when they put in that lead, then it's obviously going to recall that record and get that information and check for the existence of the record and pull that IP address and the user agent, which then we can use again. So I just have a small router here, again, for that case, just in case that they did put in a different email and it didn't find anything. If that's the case, then it's just going to send the Facebook Conversions API without that extra information, which is unfortunate, but it's better than nothing. So you can see that here I have an event name under schedule, and I have email, I have phone number, which was from Calendly. And this is something to go through as well, that the text reminder number, which is again that phone number which comes through once you send up that text reminder, it comes through as like +61 and then your number and then a bunch of spaces, which is different from how Facebook wants it, which is just the numbers essentially without the plus and the spaces. So I did need to send up another text parser with this pattern, and this takes out the pluses and it takes out the extra spaces. So once you do that, this is just sending that, and it's just sending email, text, first name, last name. The most basic. However, ideally, we do want more. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up or get that data store with the IP address and obviously the user agent. We're doing that exact same industry checking again. So again, if you want to only segment to certain industries, then you can add that here. And then we're sending that the exact same, except we've obviously got the IP and the user agent from the data store, which is great. If you have it, you want to be sending that too. So that's all there is to it. If you set it up like this, you'll have 3 lead events or 2 and 1 page view event done with absolutely no pixel, no code, and it should be firing away, and you should have super accurate audience data, which is super related to your target market. If you have any questions, then obviously you can reply and I'll get back to you. Otherwise, enjoy and good luck. Cheers.